Hi, everybody. Another edition of Tarter Sauce, and the studio is full today, and we're happy about that. Let me introduce the group here, and the category, Karen Hudson, who needs no introduction, but we will introduce you, is agricultural advocates. We came up with that while you weren't here, Karen, because we want to say activists or, interests, but advocates. Well, let's start with Diane Rosenberg from the great state of Iowa. Give us your affiliations, because I'm not sure I can follow them all. So you tell us.
Sure. So I'm the president and executive director of Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors, which is a community organization in southeast Iowa. I'm an Iowa consultant with the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, and that I work all around the state. And I'm also the co-founder of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, which is a coalition of 31 national, state, and community organizations addressing the factory farming issue in Iowa.
Let's see you get all that on a business card.
It's a lot.
And then we have the professor, John Ikerd. John, you many years at the University of Missouri, professor emeritus. You're now living in Iowa.
Yes, I moved to Iowa. My wife and I moved to Iowa about 7 years ago. We wanted to live in a small town. Columbia was getting too big. It's up to 100,000 people, so it's a big city. So we moved to Fairfield, Iowa, which is about 10,000 people.
Does Peoria seem like a big town to you?
Yeah, Peoria's a big town.
Big town. All right, very good.
Every time I go to a big city, I wish I was back home. But I'm also on the board of directors of the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, in addition to being a professor emeritus at the University of Missouri, and I'm on the board of the Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors. So I've stayed active in this whole area, and I like the idea of being agricultural advocates, because that's what we do, is we advocate for a socially responsible agriculture.
And speaking of advocates, we have Karen Hudson. Karen, I've known for a number of years. Karen, what's the big event that brings you here today?
The big event is the Midwest premiere of the documentary Right to Harm, and it's going to be tonight at 7 o'clock at the Riverfront Museum on the IMAX
the big screen.
Yes, yep. So we're looking forward to a good showing, and we're here to tell the story about what has happened behind the scenes with these families and communities when they're faced with industrialized livestock operations.
I didn't mean to cut you short, Karen, but why don't you give your affiliations?
Oh,
because
sure.
That's always...
Sure. Well, I originally founded Families Against Rural Messes back in 1996.
I love that acronym.
Families
I can
Against
actually
Rural
remember that
Messes,
one.
or FARM. And that was our local group in Peoria County. And since then, Danielle Diamond, my project director at the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, and Dr. Kendall Thu of Northern Illinois University, and I co-founded Illinois Citizens for Clean Air and Water. And we're an advocacy group that assists other groups across the state of Illinois with questions and answers regarding CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. And I'm also a regional associate for the National Socially Responsible Agricultural Project. And I'm also a farmer.
and you should hasten to add, and you say this when you introduce yourself at a news conference, you're a meat eater.
Yes. Yes, I like to stress that. The industry attempts to say that we are trying to put the meat industry out of business. However, most of the people that we work with are farmers themselves who raise livestock themselves. Right. So that's what I'd like to clarify. I'm an Italian. I eat meatballs with my spaghetti. My Polish grandmother, one of her favorite dishes was pork neck bones and sauerkraut. So my heritage includes eating meat, and I plan on continuing to do that. But I'm trying to send the message that we need to do that in a socially responsible manner.
We were talking earlier, and Diane, I think you made a good point that you're reaching the public, whether it's in Iowa or Illinois or Missouri, where John was. But it's not easy, because you've got large companies, and not to paint them in a negative light, because everyone's entitled to, I guess, do what they want with their money, but they portray the raising of livestock, the production of meat, in a way that confuses the public. How do you look at that?
Yes, so 50, 60, 70 years ago, we did have our livestock raised on pasture, as we see so often in advertising for, our meat, dairy, and egg products. But that has changed a lot over these last number of decades, where now most of the meat that's raised is raised in confinements, in these big, long, confined buildings that people see out in the countryside, and they may not understand what's going on in there, but that's where the livestock is actually raised for most of their life. And these buildings, concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, they're also called factory farms, they have an environmental impact because the animals are living in these buildings, their waste products are dropping into these pits that collect their waste products and that's right underneath them. So it collects these waste products for 6 months to 12 months at a time. And as it's sitting in those buildings, those waste products are starting to putrefy. They're decomposing anaerobically without light and without air, which is the very opposite of what happens when an animal is on pasture. That's where it decomposes and in a very healthy, natural manner. But this doesn't under these pits, and so there are a lot of gases that get generated and toxins that get generated, and there are these fans on the side of these buildings that have to blow that air out of these buildings, otherwise the animals inside would die. And these gases are going into the environment. Hydrogen sulfide and ammonia being two of the most toxic and offensive ones, and it causes all sorts of terrible aromas, a stench really, and it creates a lot of health problems for people living there.
Certainly, I was going to say for rural residents.
Yes.
John, what's your take on that? So do we want to get rid of factory farms? Do we want to just clean them up? Or what's the take here?
Well, you know, my personal opinion is we either need to effectively regulate them, and I doubt that they can be effectively regulated in terms of protecting the public health and the natural
because it would be too expensive?
Yeah, I think if you regulated CAFOs the way they should be regulated, they wouldn't be able to compete with kind of the independent family farms that would produce their hogs under more hogs, chickens, and dairy, whatever, under more humane practices, more environmentally sound practices. And while most of the meat, milk, and eggs is produced in these large confinement operations, most of the farmers, the total number of farmers out here, are not necessarily into this industrial model of agriculture. So we could change agriculture significantly. If we regulate the CAFOs go away, we'd still be able to produce plenty of meat for the people. In fact, in the Right to Harm movie or documentary, I haven't seen it all, but I was on a farm where the producer was producing everything outside under humane conditions. Nothing was in a house. He had like 2,500 hogs a year. He was slaughtering 50 hogs a week on site, 30,000 chickens, whatever. Everything was outside, no odors, nothing. And he was producing a large quantity of meat.
So it can be done.
About 1 million pounds of meat a week on this farm, a year on this farm, that he was producing without CAFOs. So we don't really need them. So I argue we either ought to effectively regulate them, which I think would mean the end of them, or we ought to simply say that it's not socially responsible, it's not ethically, morally right to produce animals in this way, and we don't have to in order to feed people at a reasonable cost.
Karen, what about the argument that, well, and I don't know who would make this argument, but let's assume that the industry would, we need CAFOs to be economically feasible, to meet the need of the American public. They want their hamburgers, they want their pork chops. What do you say to that?
Well, as John said, we have produced a good amount of meat for the public in the past without externalizing our costs like this. Folks don't realize that when they eat a piece of CAFO meat, how much subsidy has gone into that for the industry, how much externalized costs on the community as far as infrastructure in the roads, in the public health, in the local dollar spent. The research backs up that locally produced, sustainably produced farms are better for not only the environment, but the socioeconomic future of every community. And we've got decades of research that backs that up. So, the industry likes to say that we're trying to stop meat production. That is not the case. We want, first of all, in Illinois, we want them to follow the rules that are on the books, and that's not happening.
Right.
We're seeing these facilities being cited incorrectly, where these criteria are not being met, and the only reason we're discovering that is we're working with people to get a FOIA and actually look into the application process and follow up. The reason this is happening as well is the fact that we have less IEPA on staff in the state of Illinois, less Illinois Department of Agriculture people on staff. In 2007, there were 57 folks at the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency working on this. Today, they're between 22 and 24, as we see more and more facilities are being permitted and constructed and expanding across the state.
Diane, what about Iowa? Is that a similar story? The oversight, are you getting it? I mean, those factory farms?
We have a Department of Natural Resources. They, too, are sorely understaffed. They cannot really investigate all of the complaints adequately that come to them. Whenever a CAFO is proposed that has 1,250 hogs or more, they have to fill out a manure management plan that shows where the manure is going to go. It's a complex application. I review them, so I know how complex they are, but the department doesn't have the staffing to really review these manure management plans to make sure that the rates of manure that are being applied are correct for the crops and the land, the land slope and all of that. So there's a lot that doesn't get covered. Our laws in general are pretty lax, I feel. We don't really have regulations that truly protect the communities. We don't have local control.
Yeah,
so that's
come up.
Yeah,
we can speak to that.
So that communities really don't have a say if a site is appropriate for that community or not. You get CAFOs put in places where tourism is a big issue, or next to. I'm working with one family right now. This CAFO is being put a half a mile, and there's like 4 children there. There's a French bulldog business, which has respiratory issues to begin with, and having a CAFO.
This won't help.
This is not going to help.
No.
And the woman, the mother, has some serious autoimmune issues, and her doctor is telling her, this is not good for you. He's written a letter and what have you. But there's no way that our laws will allow a situation to be taken into consideration like this in the siting. So we have similar issues in Iowa.
John, I was going to ask you, is part of this problem the fact that rural America has declined in population, right, that you have an opportunity, as Diane said, where the average person may not be aware of the odor coming out of a CAFO. But it's unfortunate because those few folks, I won't say few folks because there's millions across the country, but what about rural America? What's that status?
Well, I think you mentioned, is this a problem because of what's happened to rural America? I think what happens to rural America is a result of what we're seeing here in terms of the industrialization of agriculture. When you talk about these large-scale animal operations, it's the epitome of what I refer to as industrial agriculture. And the whole idea was to make agriculture more efficient by specializing. That's the reason we move away from diversified farms, specialize in one crop or one livestock operation, and then a special phase of that operation. So highly specialized. Once you specialize, then you kind of need to standardize the process, like these factory farms. The reason they call them factory farms, it's like you're bringing in little pigs here, let's say, and you're bringing in feed on one side and you're running them through down an assembly line. You come out 5 or 6 months later with a finished hog on the other end. It's all run in a very well-defined process that's defined by the corporation that they contract with. They all come out basically the same weight, just like manufacturing hogs. Well, once you've specialized and standardized, now you've simplified and routinized the management process so you can mechanize a large part of it, and you can consolidate the control into larger and larger operations. And that's what made this very attractive as far as just making money. But as a consequence of that, you're employing fewer people.
Yep.
You have fewer people making decisions, and those are the ones that make the money. We move from farms, that were a few hundred acres to a few thousand acres, or animal operations from a few hundred head to thousands or hundreds of thousands of heads when we get to chickens. Well, that's the manager is, you're not producing that much more product, but you're doing it with fewer people. You got fewer people working because it's mechanized. So we see the consequences in rural communities. Rural communities based on agriculture. The demise of family farms, have been forced out of business. It wasn't that, that they weren't doing a good job out here. It's we transformed agriculture in a way that we destroyed economic opportunities for family farms. Those were the people that supported the rural communities in terms of not only buying, agricultural supplies or equipment in town. The large operations bypass the small towns and go directly to the centers, but they also shopping on Main Street, for haircuts and cars and shoes. And they also were the people that were in the churches and the people that kept the schools open, the people that served in volunteer fire departments. We basically destroyed rural America as a consequence of industrializing agriculture. So I think we need to approach it from that standpoint. And then certainly as a consequence of doing that, the vision of rural America now is a chronically economically depressed, socially deprived area. Mm-hmm. And the people in towns that are making the decisions about what's going on in rural America have very little realization of the reality. And we've also divided the rural communities among the people that are actually farming mm-hmm. and the people that are running the big industrial operations. Most of the farmers out here today do not have CAFOs.
Right.
Most of the farmers themselves have smaller operations, many of them part-time. But it's the CAFOs and the big operations that are producing most of the output. But as Karen said a while ago, in hogs, for example, we weren't producing any more hogs than we had back in the 50s and 60s until 2012. And I think 2012 we continued to expand because we're expanding exports. It wasn't to meet the needs of people. We're putting CAFOs in dairy operations today. I grew up on a dairy farm. We've had chronic surpluses of milk and dairy products ever since I was a kid. But yet we're going to CAFOs as if we had to have CAFOs to produce enough milk. And you see this same thing. They're not really needed. The thing that's driving them is somebody is making a lot of money on them.
Profit.
And increasingly, it's not even the people that used to be farmers that went into CAFOs. Increasingly, it's the corporations that are actually owning the CAFOs or large investment operations that have multiple CAFOs. They simply hire somebody to take care of.
So, Karen, can the movie like that's playing tonight? Well said, John. you just ran down the whole the whole basic problem of rural America here, and you heard it, folks. What about that? Can a movie like this turn this around?
Yes. The movie is very gripping because it's stories from families who are just trying to live their lives, and this comes into their community, and it's their personal stories, and it starts on the West Coast and goes to the East Coast.
And so how new is this film?
Well, the first two premieres at film festivals has just been recently, so it's very, very new.
So this is just now getting out.
Right. People can see the trailer online and then ask for private screenings with their groups after July 1st. Again? It's called Right to Harm.
Right to Harm. Okay.
And I believe this movie, seeing these folks and the effects on their families, on their health, on their homes, I think people will become enraged when they see it, and then I hope that they will become engaged in working on this issue and talking to their legislators and working on the issue.
Because we were talking with Diane and John earlier, most people are removed from that vision or that awareness of what these farms can do to the folks that live nearby. Is there a way to carry this on? Okay, you got a movie going, you get some people to see it, maybe the interested ones will show, but how do you reach that general public? Diane, what do you think? I mean, you've dealt with this for a number of years.
we just keep on keeping on. I mean, that's what we have to do. The movie is going to be screened widely around the country. We have networks of organizations that are, going to be having screenings in their areas. We're setting one up for Des Moines, come end of May, and then through the Iowa Alliance, for example, we're going to arrange for a number of screenings throughout the state that way. And, through the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, we're consultants all around the country. We're going to be doing the same, reaching out that way. I believe the movie is going to be entered into a few more film festivals. The filmmaker, Matt Wexler and Annie Speecher, if I have her last name right, husband and wife team, they've made a movie already before called Sustainable about the local foods movement. They got that on Netflix, and I know they're going to try to get, some national distribution for this movie as well. So, the grassroots support and grassroots, what do I want to say? The spreading through grassroots is significant, and that's one of the ways that we're going to kind of light the fire under this movie. But I think it will take off on its own because it is pretty, as Karen said, it is very gripping. We've got one of the executive producers, Mark Bittman, so he's got his network as well. So I think this movie will take off.
How do you? I'll throw this out to you, Karen and John. How do you avoid your respective groups, being portrayed as obstructionist or, sort of dissidents that are just trying to mess up the agricultural continuity of our country? Because that's how you're being portrayed, isn't it, by the farm bureaus?
Environmental terrorists.
Environmental terrorists, exactly.
I've been,
you've been accused of that. Right?
My name has been in the same paragraph as Al Qaeda. So it's just a way of killing the messenger, and it's something that we see often. But all we ever do is speak the truth, and we know we have the moral high ground, and that's what I've got going for me when I wake up every morning.
Good.
So.
Good. Well, I think what it is we need to focus on. I truly believe this is what we're fighting for here is the future of agriculture. We're fighting for the future of animal agriculture, but agriculture in general. The last 11 years when I was at the University of Missouri, my area was in sustainable agriculture. And sustainable agriculture is an agriculture that can meet the needs of everyone in the present, the basic needs of everyone, without diminishing opportunities for those of the future. And to be sustainable, it has to be ecologically sound. Ultimately, everything of use to us comes from the earth, so we have to take care of the productivity of nature, the air, the water, the soil. It has to be socially responsible. It has to meet the needs of people as producers and consumers and so on. And it has to be economically viable. It has to, you have to be able to carry it out. Well, I would argue that industrial agriculture, particularly CAFOs, the epitome of that, meet none of those criteria of sustainability. So if we're to have a future of agriculture, and if we're to have a viable future for rural America, we have to create an agriculture that respects the rights of people that are around them in terms of the quality of their life, but also meeting their needs. We have to have an agriculture that takes care of the rural environment, that takes care of the land and the water, and we have to have an agriculture that provides opportunities for people to make decent livings on the farm. We're destroying all of those with this industrial model of animal agriculture.
Dan, I'll let you go, but let me follow up with John. How do you get city people involved in this? In other words, just, okay, I buy what you're saying, we got to turn this around. So how do they do it? Because they're removed, they're at the store, they're going to the shopping, they're not in the farming. What ideas do you have for folks? Obviously, they can get.
When we do talk to urban folks, they're very interested in our food system now. I mean, with the age of the internet, there's quite a bit of information out there. I think one of the most compelling issues around industrialized agriculture is the use of antibiotics in animal production, which is helping to drive antibiotic resistance worldwide. And that is something that folks really are very interested in, whether they're in a urban setting or a rural setting. If you're in a rural setting, you're more likely to be colonized with methicillin-resistant staph if you live near a factory farm or if you've been on a factory farm. If you're in the urban area, at the grocery store, we're seeing antibiotic-resistant pathogens on meat. So whether you're in the urban area or the rural area, you are going to be affected by the way our food is produced. And that is the biggest, my biggest driving point when I'm talking about industrialized ag is the overuse of antibiotics. We're seeing about 80% of the antibiotics in the United States that is produced is used in livestock production in the absence of disease.
Wow.
And we're finding more about livestock-associated MRSA and all that, and we're getting research is there every month. There is brand new research out there. So that's my calling point for public health.
I would hope this particular documentary will bring a new dimension as well, because we called it the right to harm. And I think what this points out is the basic human rights of people that are living in the proximity to these CAFOs is being violated. And it's being violated by the proclaimed economic right of the basically the CAFO operators to do any sort of ongoing business. So I'm hoping that we can engage the general public at the deeper level, as saying, you know, in spite of, in light of all of the things that we're talking about here, this is simply not an ethically or morally right way to produce. And what we're doing is we're allowing the economic rights of the CAFO operators to take priority over the basic human rights of the people. And I'm hoping that will come through to the general public from this documentary.
Diane?
And I wanted to say, to answer that question, in Iowa, so this has become an urban issue as well because of the water quality crisis we had. And we saw in Des Moines that Des Moines gets their water from north of the northern counties, comes full of nitrates. They have to run their denitrification process in the Des Moines Waterworks. And there was a big lawsuit a couple of years ago, which got thrown out because the lack of standing to bring this lawsuit, without going into a lot of details. However, many people have gotten engaged because of the water quality and the health impacts of, having too many nitrates. There's a lot of studies that are coming out now that are showing that there's cancer, various cancers associated with high levels of nitrate consumption, even birth defects with 5 milligrams of or milliliters of nitrates, which is half of the EPA acceptability levels, and showing birth defects, when women are drinking these when they're pregnant. And, and then you've got issues with the blue-green algae, certain strains of blue-green algae that create terrible toxins in the water. And so the Des Moines Waterworks has had to deal with getting these nitrates and this phosphorus out, the blue-green algae out of their water at a cost to their ratepayers.
Sure.
And so, and other municipalities in Iowa are also struggling with getting the nitrates out of their water at a big cost to them. So this has become in Iowa an urban and a rural issue when you look at the health impacts, even from drinking something that you would normally have a lot of confidence in,
sure,
a glass of water from your tap.
But it's been involved. We need to kind of wrap this up, so I want to get your last thoughts here. We see now in the stores quite commonly cage-free eggs. Will we see CAFO-free beef, CAFO-free pork? I mean, is that a possibility, or is that the right direction? What do you think, John?
Well, I think we very well may see that. We always have to question the credibility of that. I think the important question is, or important conclusion is the reason you see the cage-free and crate-free and hormone and antibiotic-free and pesticide-free and a whole range of those is there's a growing consumer awareness that there's something fundamentally wrong in the food system. And so you're beginning to see now some of the big operators like Tyson and Purdue on chickens that have hormone-free, antibiotic-free, no antibiotics ever. They're advertised. That's in response to consumers' awareness that there's a fundamental problem here. What I think is they'll try to go as far as they can, to modify the system, kind of the industrial system I've described, to meet this or to deal with this consumer.
To be able to keep going with it.
Consumer demand. can. But I think the problem is that the fundamental flaw is in the system itself. Mm-hmm. You're putting too many animals in too small a space in order to gain the economic efficiency to accommodate either nature's ability to assimilate that or the animal's ability to be healthy without the things that we're talking about here. And if you deal with all those, then you basically have to change the system to accommodate it. Okay. And so I think you may see attempts to convince the consumers that they're dealing with these, but I think ultimately the only way to deal with this issue is to fundamentally change the system. And, and that's what I think ultimately will be the outcome, hopefully.
And local control would be one of those, wouldn't it?
Local control is one of those. We see local control for low-level nuclear waste and incinerator sites, garbage dumps, for local county boards to make those decisions. They have the expertise, and this should be no different. This is not regular farming. This is an industry that needs to be regulated as such. And I also would like to stress that I feel like I have to pass the torch on to others. You know, as we age, we need to educate the younger generation. And as a case in point, my grandson, on his first day of kindergarten, during milk break, he brought his milk carton up to his teacher and asked if this came from a factory farm. Where did my milk come from? And she looked at him.
Oh, you're Karen Hudson's granddaughter.
She said, "You're Karen Hudson's." No, and basically, he educated his. She said, "What is a factory farm?" And he educated his kindergarten teacher regarding this. And I got a call that night from my daughter. "Mom, did you tell Brennan not to drink the milk at school?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, he wanted to know if it came from a factory farm, and educated his teacher about it. I just wanted to let you know that." So our children are watching us, our younger generation. We are passing this torch of knowledge down to them, and I see this because I've involved my children and my grandchildren in this issue.
That's great.
In any way I can.
Well, and maybe there is, I think as you folks said, and Dan, you mentioned, you just got to keep on keeping on. The millennials, we often hear, they're on their phones too much or whatever, but that group is also possibly taking note and saying, we want to have, as John said, maybe turn it back to the proper use.
I got a call yesterday. There's somebody driving up from Missouri to see the movie tonight. So we think that the word's getting out, and we're looking to have a good showing tonight.
Why don't you give the time again?
Yes, it's 7 p.m. at the IMAX Riverfront Theater Museum in downtown Peoria at 222 Southwest Washington, and it's free.
Well, you got a donation.
We could take a donation, although we're making this free and available to folks who want to learn about the issue, and we'll have resources there and folks to talk to, and they'll be able to meet and greet the cinematographer as well as the cast members, the two cast members I have sitting next to me. So we hope for a good showing.
Very good. We have the cast members right here.
Thank you.
Well, hey, we appreciate Diane Rosenberg, John Ikerd, and Karen Hudson for educating us, because I think that you got to keep repeating those things, because the other side will repeat their messages. Yes. And I say the other side, we like to paint things in black and white here on Tarter Sauce, because that's how I understand it. Anyway, well, we have to roll this up. We thank you very much, folks. And again, movie tonight,
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Go at 6 and talk to them.
Come early. We'll talk and have fellowship. So
very good. And Matt Dayhoff, we want to thank him for getting this out on all the social media that this does go on. We'll see you next time on Tarter Sauce.